We need someone who's a specialist in this field, someone who can keep track of all the details, and someone who can make sure that we're coming to God in the right way, at the right time. We need specialists. I saw this video this last week. I've seen it before, but I watched it again this last week just to remind myself. I've got some pictures I'm going to show you here. Here's a guy named Thomas Thwaites, and he was inspired by a quote he read in a book. The book is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and some of you are chuckling because you've read it, and others of you are like, oh, I've heard someone talk about that before. There was a movie. Anyway, here's the quote, talking about a particular character in the book. Left to his own devices, he couldn't build a toaster. He could just about make a sandwich, and that was it. And so the quote inspired this guy to say, well, could I build a toaster? Left to my own devices, could I make a sandwich? Could I build a toaster? See, our society is so complex that if you begin to think about how we get the things that we get, it's obvious that no one human being could do anything that we enjoy. So let's just take the toaster for an example. He bought a toaster, a cheap toaster, and he took it apart and he laid all the pieces on his desk and he counted them all and he looked at them all and he figured out what they were made from. There was copper, there was steel, there was mica, there was nickel, and there was plastic. And that was the stuff he laid out, and then he figured out the parts and he thought, okay, I'll just try to replicate these parts on my own. But then you're initially faced with a problem. If I'm going to make steel, where do I get the iron ore? How do I process? So he went to a mine, he grabbed some rocks, put them in his suitcase, brought them back on the plane, and then he decided he was going to try to smelt this iron ore down into iron so he could make the steel that he needed for his toaster. And he had to build his own furnace. So that's a leaf blower into a trash can, and he's trying to smelt iron ore, and he got it pretty darn hot, but this didn't work. What did work, and again, that's cheating because he's using a leaf blower. Someone had to build the leaf blower. He didn't make that himself. But then this is even cheating a little bit more. That didn't work, so he used a microwave. Apparently, if you line the microwave with, do not try this at home, he is a professional. If you line a microwave with insulation and then put iron ore in the middle and then turn the thing on for 30 minutes at full blast, apparently it turns into iron. So anyway, he used that and he made this. So that's the iron, and then there's a piece of mica there as an insulator. He had to make his own wires out of copper, and that was pretty crazy. But he had to cover the whole thing in plastic, and in order to do that, he went to the local landfill and dug out some old plastic and melted it down because he couldn't get access to the raw materials to make real plastic, so he had to melt down already made plastic, and this is what he ended up with. So trying to build a toaster completely from scratch, that's what he ended up with. You'll notice the plug is on the far left-hand side, and if you look very closely, the wires there are not insulated. He tried to plug it in, and it lasted for about 5 minutes until there was hissing and smoking, and so I think then he turned the circuit off. At least I hope he did. But here's the last slide I'll show you. Here's that toaster on the shelf with other toasters. I don't know how he got it into Walmart, but you can't see it where you are, but if you can see it, some of these toasters are going for 18 pounds, because this is in England, 24 pounds, 22 pounds on the bottom, and the one that he made is 1,100 pounds. It's 1,187 pounds and 54 cents. I'm guessing that's what it cost him to produce it. Here's the deal. Life is so complicated that we can't even build a toaster. How is it possible for us to assume we can get to God? We need specialists. We need priests. So how do we get priests? Well, before we get there, let's just fill in our blank and let's talk about what a priest provides for us that we can't do on our own. A priest gives us access to God. God says to Aaron, Aaron's going to learn all the details. He's going to make sure all the details take place. I'm going to put other priests around him. You guys handle the moral stuff, the ethical stuff. The priest is going to handle giving people access to God. We need someone to fill that role. Sometimes I can't even believe the complexity that is the Sunday morning worship service for us here at LCC. I mean, there was a point in time where I knew everything that was happening, and now I don't. There are things going on around this place that I don't have a clue about. In other words, no one person knows, let alone can put together even one of our worship gatherings. We've already surpassed the complexity level. It's just that big. We need a priest to give us access to God. Okay, let's move on. The rest of this is going to go a little bit more quickly, but who is eligible? You're already in Exodus chapter 30, or you're near there. So let's go to Exodus 32 now, just a couple pages over, and you're going to see an amazingly disturbing story. On the one hand, it's a story that I really appreciate is in the Bible. On the other hand, it freaks me out. And it's all about the priests. Moses is on the mountain. God is talking to Moses about Aaron and how Aaron is going to be the priest. While that's happening, Aaron is down at the foot of the mountain with the people, and they say, we need access to God. And Aaron says, give me your gold, I'll make you access to God. And he forms an idol in the shape of a calf, and then these people are worshiping that thing. You know the story. So Moses is on the mountain. Here's Aaron down at the bottom. He makes a golden calf because he's trying to give people access to God, and that's completely the wrong way to do it. God had already given them the 10 Commandments. They knew it was wrong, but Aaron still does it anyway. The people worship at the thing. Moses comes down, gets angry, crashes the stone tablets on the ground. You know that whole story. But here's the part of the story you might not know. It begins in verse 25. Moses saw that all the people were running wild and that Aaron had let them get out of control and so become a laughingstock to their enemies. So he stood at the entrance to the camp and said, whoever is for the Lord, come to me. And all the Levites rallied to him. Of course, they're his relatives. Moses was from the tribe of Levi, so was Aaron. They were brothers. And so now all the Levites, all of Moses' and Aaron's brothers and cousins and aunts and uncles and whatnot they're rushing to him. They're all there. All the Levites rallied to him. Then he said to them, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side. Go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor. The Levites did as Moses commanded. And that day, about 3,000 of the people died. Then Moses said, you've been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day. That's how the Levites get selected to be the priests. Later on at the mountain, God will say, the Levites are now set apart for me. The Levites are only for me. They're not for their brothers and their sisters and their neighbors and their friends. They're devoted to God because they're the people who indiscriminately and randomly slaughtered the people who were disobeying God. 3,000 people died. There were like 2 million people who were there. I mean, it was a huge entourage of people that they had. 3,000 of them died. So it's not a huge percentage, but it's still atrocious in our sense of things. And God says that's the way this is going to happen. Here's the deal. God's holiness is so great that if you want to stand for him, you need to be obedient to him. And you need to be so passionate for his honor that it borders on violence. Now, I'm not saying we need that today. We'll get to what we need today in just a moment. But God was saying to these people back then, I must be honored. And if I need to be honored, you need to be violently defending my honor. So here is the requirement for a priest. A priest must be obediently violent for God's honor. He's really that holy. But the problem, man, the priesthood, if you didn't pick up on it already, you should realize that Aaron was not a very good guy to lead people to God, to give people access to God. Moses is on the mountain, and Aaron makes a golden idol for people to worship. And he's supposed to be the one who's going to lead us to God, the real God, the God who made heaven and earth. How is that going to happen? He is a flawed individual. Well, yeah. That's the next lesson we need to learn. Throughout the Old Testament, we find out that the whole priesthood is flawed. If you flip over to Leviticus 10, you'll see a story. I'll just narrate it for you a little bit. You can turn there if you want. But what happens is Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, the oldest ones, these are guys who actually saw God. They went onto the mountain and they somehow saw God's glory face to face. And they, in Leviticus 10, immediately after God sets them up as priests, they put what the Bible tells us is unauthorized fire, against the Lord's command into little incense burners that they have, and they bring it to the tent of meeting, that tabernacle place where God met with his people. They bring this unauthorized fire, this censers of incense, to the tent of meeting, and God is so angry with them that they would imagine they could invent their own forms of worship, that God just killed them on the spot. Fire comes out from the tent, and they die by fire because they brought unauthorized fire. And then Moses says, this is why God says, among those who approach me, I must be holy, set apart. You don't do your own thing, you do my thing. You follow my rules, God says. Then you can come to me. Okay, so here we go. Immediately after the priesthood starts, it's messed up. You read the Old Testament and you find the least significant players in the Bible whose names are mentioned are priests. If we mention names from the Bible, there are some names that we have today. David. We got tons of Davids today. We've got Joshua. We've got, well, we don't have so many Moseses, but we've got some of these names represented today. But how many of us know some of the names of the priests, Azariah and others? See, that's the thing. You would think the guy who's going to lead us into the throne of God's presence is the one we're going to remember. But they're so flawed throughout the history of Israel that we barely hear about them. In fact, in the book of Judges, the word priest shows up in only the final 2 chapters of the book of Judges. And in those 2 chapters, that one word is talking about one man and his sons. And that one situation is about a man who's a deceiving, conniving, scheming kind of dude. And it's in a very negative context. So the only priest we find in the entire book of Judges, which is between Joshua entering the land and when we begin to learn about King David and his family, the priesthood is just basically absent. So here's the deal. If you want to come to God, you need a priest. But our priests are messed up. So David, when he's king, begins to think, what's going to happen? One day he's writing a song and he's praying and he's inspired to write some words, and we find those words in Psalm 110. Well, I should give you your blanks first. Since our priests are so messed up, we need a priest who doesn't need a priest. There you go. You see, if the priests are messed up, they need someone else to be their priest, so their sins can be forgiven. And David knows this. He begins to think about this, and so he writes this prophecy in Psalm 110. Very first line, he says, the Lord, it's all caps. That means in ancient Hebrew, that word was Yahweh. Yahweh says to my Lord. Now, if you're paying attention at all,